Love your neighbor. It sounds simple, and perhaps it is. Perhaps loving your neighbor is as simple as paddling a canoe together, putting up with his novice J strokes, and listening to her bad jokes. Perhaps it's as simple as sharing a meal together, a meal that isn't mediated by screens or schedules or secrets. Perhaps loving your neighbor is as simple as treating people how they want to be treated, and not how you would want to be treated. Perhaps it's as simple as recognizing and acknowledging and celebrating that we are not actually all the same. Perhaps loving your neighbor isn't as complicated as our world makes it seem. Welcoming all people isn't complicated. Watching the sunset with a cabin mate you just met isn't complicated. Passing the bread isn't complicated. It's simple. And yet, it might be the most radical thing we can do as Christians. Perhaps the most radical thing that Camp Fowler did this summer was to make loving your neighbor simple, was to use this long-standing commitment to simplicity to reveal how to create a more just and loving world. Because it really is simple. Fight for the powerless, share what you have, protect the environment, and be the church as God intended it to be. This summer, children and teenagers and young adults and old adults caught hold of this idea that loving people is simple. They caught hold of it sitting on the floor of the chapel, or sharing food around a table, or staring at the night sky from the meadows, or sailing across a lake for the first time.
Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Loving your neighbor means standing with all of creation, with the ravens and the turkey vultures and the hemlocks and the sugar maples and the breeze in the air and the big black bears and the white-tailed fawn, the dirt and the soil, the lakes and streams and rivers. Loving your neighbor means loving the earth. Caring for creation as your neighbor isn't synonymous with recycling. It's designing every building, planning every meal, and disposing of every ounce of waste with the earth in mind. It's not just habits we develop or actions we do. It's a living, breathing, intimate love of God's earth that compels us to think and act differently. It's nature staff carting the compost out to the meadows one more time. It's digging up Indian cucumber and letting each child taste one sweet and tiny morsel. It's having solar panels instead of shiny Camp Fowler vans. It's baking bread and pizza crust and brownies from scratch. It's milk in glass jars. And it's spending time outside. Because how can we expect children to care for the earth if they never spend time living with it and playing in it and breathing in it? And so we hand them a paddle, even if they don't know what it is, especially if they don't know what it is. We walk them into the woods and say, "Look at that, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that spectacular?" We explain what the ORT report is week after week, as many times as we need until they get it. We say yes, even though it is raining. In fact, because it's raining. We dig in the dirt with them to harvest 9 small potatoes and celebrate when those potatoes are added to Thanksgiving dinner. We remind them to look up at the stars when they're afraid of the dark, and we watch them watch a solar eclipse through 8-year-old eyes, and we smile. Because we can only love creation as our neighbor if we spend time in it. This summer at Camp Fowler, children got to do just that.
Loving your neighbor means living as a community, even when it's easier not to, even when it means you might have to be uncomfortable, even when it means you might have to give something up. It means inviting in the people who the rest of the world sees as outsiders, the Muslim child and the introverted kid who everyone thinks is just weird, the young boy who knows he's gay but to whom no one will listen, the teenager who gets so angry and the child who is blind, the young son of immigrants and small-town girl who never really left. This summer, children heard stories and sang songs and talked about what it looks like to welcome all people, to love all people, because that's what Jesus did. For 1 week, they lived among a group of people to whom they unquestionably belonged, simply because they are there. They all got to participate, they They all got to contribute, whether by jumping for Tuesday's breakfast, by powering the canoe from the front, or by encouraging their struggling cabin mate while climbing a mountain. They all got to feel what it's like to be part of a community. Because as Christians, we need to be in community. Real community, not teams or groups or clubs, but active, breathing community. We need to belong to a group of people who are going to welcome us, laugh with us, help us to keep looking outward, hold us, cry with us, pray with us. This summer, children got to experience a community that strives to be like that strives to love people the way Christ loved people, if even for just 1 week. They got to taste and see what it feels like to be loved by a God that knows them deeply and by other people who might not know them at all, learning to love from love itself.
We were